Following on from my recent video looking at Mego's DC superheroes, today I'm going to be turning my attention to my personal favourite, Batman's Rogues Gallery. Growing up with the Batman films and of course the animated series, I've always had a real soft spot for Batman's Rogues Gallery. Characters like the Joker or the Riddler were indelibly printed on my child's mind's eye, and I've maintained a lifelong love of these characters well into my adultdom. So it's especially pleasing to me to finally have some of these characters in the Mego format. And I think there's something about these characters that lend themselves very nicely to Mego or Mego style. These characters and their costumes are often slightly childish and bizarre and outlandish, and something about that just works really well. And despite these figures having an initial run in the 1970s and have been updated several times since in recent years, this latest wave is once again trying to reproduce those figures quite faithfully to their original releases, but with some updates and tweaks and new molds here and there, which I think makes them attractive to collectors who already owned the originals and like a slight update to their original figures, or for people like me who never had the original figures but just have a soft spot for these characters and for the Mego or Mego format. And today I'm going to take a closer look at three of my personal favourites, the Riddler, the Penguin, and of course, the Joker. So starting off with the Joker, as we can see the packaging here is very similar. It's the same design, it's the same branding approach that they took to the DC superheroes. Essentially a plain card with the symbol of the character, in this case it's the Joker's head, and in the background there's a silhouetted skyline. I'm not hugely enamoured with this card, to be honest. This approach seems a little bit lazy, a little bit dull. It's fine, it's nice and colourful, which is great, but considering some of the other releases that Mego have been experimenting with lately, there's something they could have done a lot more to make this a bit more exciting or appealing, I think. The reverse of the packaging obviously uses a nice illustrated image of the character. In this case we have the Joker. This is nice and colourful, this is quite presentable. I think you could display this and this looks pretty good. I'm never quite sure about some of the images they use since they don't always marry up with the figure that we get in the packaging in terms of the style of the costume. They tend to go for modern interpretations in the image and go for a classic design in their figure. So I wish these were more consistent and they married up a bit more. Once the figure has been liberated from his packaging, the first thing you can say about the Joker is that he is visually very eye-catching. He's very bright and very colourful, and this is instantly very attractive to the eye. Clearly, the inspiration for the head sculpt harks back to the comics of the sort of 60s and 70s appearances of the Joker, really. There's definitely something very classical about this look and design. The flamboyant hair sticking out, the manic expression on the face being massively exaggerated. You could argue that this is a Joker from different periods, but to me this is what it most closely resembles. That slightly more exaggerated, clownish quality that we got in those comic books. And I think that's a really solid choice. Obviously, this is a lot of nostalgia harking back to the 70s toy anyway, but at the same time, I think there's something very appealing about this version of the Joker in a sense that he's more child-friendly, he's more cartoonish, which is, more appropriate, I think, for a toy like this. The tailoring on the Joker is quite nice. It's certainly not the best I've seen on a Mego release, but it's pretty decent. He does obviously have this jacket which you can pull away and you can see his waistcoat underneath, and I like this, that it's all sewn up and it looks pretty good. He does also have the string bow tie at the top, which, I think is probably more effective in the planning side than the actual practical release, because it does look a little bit stringy and a little bit untidy and doesn't look quite as effective as I think it was in concept. I do really like that they went to the trouble to add some little extras in here. His coattails are very nicely done. His cufflinks also having that different material there, that different shade of green, I think is really cool. And also the pinstripe on the trousers is a very nice touch. Mercifully, Mego decided in their wisdom to give him some proper shoes, which I'm really grateful for. Some of those boots that we have on the superheroes, particularly Superman and Batman, for example, have these rubber boots where they have the seam running down the centre of the sole and it stops them balancing. There's no problems with these shoes whatsoever. Joker has no problem standing freely on his own. All in all, the Clown Prince of Crime is a pretty nice addition to this lineup. He's nice and bright and colourful and very fun. There's something visually very appealing about him, and that's what every good toy should be, in my opinion. So I think he's a welcome addition. I think he looks really good on the shelf with the others. Moving on to the Penguin, and I have to say this is one I was really highly anticipating because he's obviously a very different shape and mould to the standard Mego release. However, when we look at the card art, poor Penguin has been shortchanged a little bit because he doesn't even have a logo. It just has the Penguin written on his card. So this is quite a dull looking card, to be honest. However, things do improve a lot more on the reverse because I do think this is a very nice image that we have on the back, and it correlates fairly closely to what we see in the figure, but obviously the figure doesn't have the red tie, for example. Out of the packaging, the figure is quite impressive because, of course, he is slightly larger. He's a different shape, he's quite distinctive, and he feels a little bit different for the collection. I have to say, I really like this head sculpt as well. There's definitely something of the essence of the character in this sculpt. There's something slightly snarling there and slightly villainous and smirking about him, which I think is pretty much perfect. Also, I really like that they've actually gone to the trouble of sculpting his nose incorrectly as well, giving that beak-like appearance. And I think they've done a really, really solid job of this figure in terms of the sculpt. I think it's really good, and I like that they've caught little details like the monocle. Overall, yeah, this is a really strong head sculpt. The tailoring once again is fairly simplistic. It's certainly not as complicated or as nuanced as some of the Universal Monster releases, for example, but there's still a nice attention to detail here. There's a nice effort to do something authentic, which is pretty cool. So I do like that he's got the bow tie and the buttons on his shirt, and of course he has his coattails as well. Which, just like the Joker, these are very effective. I think they add an extra layer of interest to the figure and the tailoring overall, which is pretty cool. I also like the added detail at the cuffs of the trousers there, so we can see obviously it's got a couple of buttons, it has a slightly different material that's sewn in. It just looks visually, it's authentic to what we see in the comic books, but also it just adds a little bit of visual flair to the character, which is great. And of course, once again, he's got the same shoes that the Joker had, so he's very stable. And of course, the biggest innovation with this figure is the slightly different mould. He has a solid stomach, which is obviously much more rotund, much rounder, and this is a completely different mould to the standard Mego release, which is fantastic and unusual. I thought they might have opted for padding, but actually no, it is solid plastic, so they have created a whole new mould just for this character, which is fantastic. Now, for accessories, he only comes with his top hat. I'm really glad that this is included, and this is nicely rendered. It's a nice, solid plastic piece. That's hard plastic, it's not particularly soft. It does fit onto his head nice and easily enough, although there is a sense that it's not quite secure enough. It can fall off pretty easily. Overall, I'm really pleased that we have this, of course. It would have been nice if we had a few more accessories, though. Obviously, when I think of the Penguin, I think of his umbrellas. One of them would have been fantastic, but sadly, that wasn't included. But otherwise, overall, this is a pretty nice looking figure, especially when the top hat is applied. And finally for today, we have the Riddler, and as we can see on the card art here, we have a return to the logo, and of course it is a very distinctive logo for this character, which is the question mark. Otherwise, the branding and the approach is exactly the same. Yellow card, not a lot of detail, kind of plain and boring on the front. But interestingly, they have shaken things up a little bit when it comes to the reverse, because this time we do, of course, have a classic image of the Riddler, which is one actually represents what we get in the packaging for a change, which is pretty cool. Now, I must confess, I was actually in two minds whether to pick up this figure at all, because honestly, I've never been a fan of this costume or this design. Even as a kid, I always thought it was a little bit too much, a bit too silly and a bit lame, to be honest. However, I'm really glad I did pick him up. Again, I think the head sculpt here is pretty solid. This definitely captures the spirit, the slight smirking quality that we get with this character. The smugness, I suppose, really shines through in the head sculpt. And I think they've done a pretty nice job with the paint application as well. So yeah, this is pretty decent. And I have to say, those things that I hated about this in the comics when I was a kid, I really, really like in this toy. So all those question marks are actually really kind of fun and cool on the toy. And there's something really nice about the material they've used for his costume. The green is really vibrant and strong, and yeah, it looks really presentable. It's actually quite colourful and quite interesting, and actually is surprisingly effective. There's no shoes this time around, but thankfully there are no problems with him standing. He stands freely on his own without any issues of wobbling or falling over, so this is really effective, and quite nice that he actually looks a little bit different from the others in the line as well. Sadly, just like the Joker, there are no accessories with this figure, which is a real shame. Something would have been nice. It's always nice to have a little prop, if nothing else, to go with these figures. But nevertheless, this is quite a fun, colourful figure, and I have to say, probably, strangely enough, my favourite of the three. So there you have it, there is my whistle-stop tour of 3 of Batman's Rogue Gallery. I have to say, I really like these. They're very colourful, they're fun characters to have in the collection, and they all look very distinctive and interesting on the shelf together. So I think these are quite distinctive and definitely worth adding to your collection if you haven't got them already. And I'm hoping as well that they'll continue to expand this line and have a few more characters over time. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.